A millionaire rushes home from his pharmaceutical empire to find his paralyzed son sitting upright for the first time in 3 years. What the humble janitor's daughter whispered in his ear will leave you speechless. The November wind swept through downtown Charlotte with a bitter chill that cut through even the finest wool coats. Dr. Alexander Thornfield stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 47th floor of the Thornfield Pharmaceuticals tower, watching storm clouds gather over the Queen City skyline. At 44, he commanded a medical empire worth over $800 million, with research facilities spanning 3 continents. His company's breakthrough treatments had saved countless lives, earned him international recognition, and filled his bank accounts beyond measure. Yet success felt like ashes in his mouth now. The antique grandfather clock in his mahogany-paneled office chimed 2:30 p.m. Alexander frowned, checking his Patek Philippe watch. He never left the office before 6, hadn't in 3 years. Board meetings, research reviews, and international conference calls typically kept him chained to his desk until well past midnight. His assistant, Margaret, had even commented on his unusual request to clear his afternoon schedule. But something was pulling him home today. An inexplicable restlessness, like a voice calling from somewhere deep in his chest. He couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it with his scientific mind, but the feeling was undeniable. Alexander loosened his Italian silk tie and gathered his briefcase. The drive to his estate in Myers Park would take 20 minutes in current traffic, 20 minutes to prepare himself for another evening of suffocating silence. The Thornfield mansion sat on 5 pristine acres, a testament to old Southern money and new pharmaceutical wealth. Built in 1924 and meticulously restored, the Georgian colonial boasted 12 bedrooms, a library that could house a small university's collection, and gardens that had once been featured in Architectural Digest. But for the past 1,095 days, it had felt more like a beautiful mausoleum than a home. That's how long it had been since the horseback riding accident. Since his 17-year-old son Christopher had last walked, smiled, or acknowledged that his father existed. The doctors at Duke University Hospital had delivered their verdict with clinical precision: complete spinal cord injury at the L1 vertebra. Paraplegia is permanent. We're sorry. But Christopher's physical paralysis was only part of the devastation. In the weeks following the accident, as the reality of his condition settled in, something in his son's spirit had broken too. The boy who had once captained his prep school's lacrosse team, who had dreams of following his father into medicine, who could light up any room with his infectious laugh, that boy had simply vanished. Christopher now spent his days positioned by the bay windows in the main sitting room, staring out at the gardens he once ran through. He never spoke. Never made eye contact. Never showed any sign that he heard the parade of physical therapists, neurologists, and psychiatrists who rotated through their home like well-meaning ghosts. Alexander had spared no expense. The finest specialists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and even experimental treatments in Switzerland. He'd converted the entire East Wing into a state-of-the-art rehabilitation center. Nothing worked. Christopher remained trapped in a prison of his own making, and Alexander felt like he was slowly suffocating watching his only child fade away. His ex-wife Victoria had remarried and moved to Charleston 8 months ago. "I can't watch him disappear," she'd said through tears during their last argument. "And I can't watch you destroy yourself trying to fix something that can't be fixed." The house staff, Margaret, the head butler, Thomas, the groundskeeper, and Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell, the longtime housekeeper, maintained the mansion with clockwork efficiency. But they moved around Christopher like he was fragile furniture, speaking in hushed tones, treating him with the careful politeness reserved for broken things. As Alexander's Tesla Model S Plaid wound through the tree-lined driveway, autumn leaves swirled in miniature tornadoes across the cobblestone path. The mansion's warm yellow lights glowed against the gray afternoon, but they felt cold to him now. Empty. He parked in the circular drive and sat for a moment, gathering the emotional armor he wore each evening. Dinner would be served promptly at 6. He would make conversation about his day while Christopher stared silently at his untouched plate. Then Alexander would retreat to his study with a glass of 30-year-old Macallan and pretend to read medical journals while really just listening to the crushing quiet of his broken family. The heavy oak front door opened to the familiar scent of Mrs. Hartwell's lavender cleaning products and the faint aroma of dinner preparations. Everything was exactly as it should be, polished, perfect, and lifeless. But something was different today. Music. Soft, acoustic guitar notes drifted from the sitting room, accompanied by a voice he didn't recognize. A young woman's voice, singing in what sounded like Portuguese. Neo chormais, meu menino. Você é mais forte do que imagina. Alexander felt his heart skip. Christopher hadn't responded to music since the accident, despite it once being his passion. The boy had played guitar beautifully, had even written songs about their family trips to Brazil, where Victoria's grandmother had been born. Moving quietly across the marble foyer, Alexander approached the sitting room. What he saw through the doorway made him stop breathing. A young woman, perhaps 20 or 21, sat cross-legged on the Persian rug beside Christopher's wheelchair. She had warm brown skin and long, dark hair that caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. She wore a simple uniform, the navy blue polo and khakis of the building maintenance company. Her guitar was clearly old, though it worn smooth by countless hands, but her fingers moved across the strings with practiced grace. But it wasn't the music that nearly dropped Alexander to his knees. Christopher was leaning forward in his wheelchair. His eyes, those green eyes that had been vacant for 3 years, were focused on the girl's face. His right hand, the hand that hadn't moved voluntarily since the accident, was resting on the arm of his wheelchair, fingers gently tapping to the rhythm. "Seu pai te ama muito," the girl continued, switching to accented English. "Your father loves you so much. I see it in the way he looks at your picture on his desk. Sometimes love gets stuck inside us when we're hurting, but it's still there. Like seeds waiting for spring." She strummed a chord progression that Alexander recognized, a Brazilian lullaby Victoria used to hum while rocking Christopher as a baby. "My name is Isabella Santos," she said softly, her voice carrying the musical cadence of someone who spoke multiple languages. "My mama cleans offices downtown, and sometimes I help her after my nursing classes. But today, Mrs. Hartwell asked if I could sit with you while she ran errands. She said you might like some company." Alexander gripped the doorframe, his knuckles white. Isabella continued talking to Christopher as if he were any normal teenager, telling him about her nursing program at Central Piedmont Community College, about her family's small apartment in the Hispanic community near South End, about how her little brother Miguel loved to build things with his hands. "You know what Miguel told me once?" Isabella said, adjusting her guitar. "He said that sometimes when something breaks, it doesn't mean it's ruined. Sometimes it just means it's ready to become something new. Something even stronger." And then the impossible happened. Christopher's lips moved. No sound came out, but Alexander could see his son trying to form words for the first time in 1,095 days. Isabella noticed too. She leaned closer, her expression gentle and encouraging. "It's okay to be scared of talking again. Words can feel heavy when you haven't used them for a while. But I'm listening whenever you're ready." Christopher's hand moved from the armrest to reach, shakily, tentatively, toward Isabella's guitar. She immediately understood, placing the instrument carefully across his lap and guiding his fingers to the strings. The sound that emerged was barely a whisper of music, but it was intentional. Christopher was playing. After 3 years of silence, he was creating sound again. Alexander's vision blurred as tears he'd been holding back for 1,095 days finally broke free. His son, his brilliant, musical, lost son, was coming back. Isabella must have sensed his presence because she turned, her dark eyes widening with surprise and concern. "Oh, Dr. Thornfield. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hartwell said it would be okay for me to sit with Christopher. I'm Isabella Santos from Santos Cleaning Services. I didn't mean to overstep any boundaries." Alexander held up a trembling hand, unable to speak. He could only stare at Christopher, who for the first time in 3 years was looking directly at him. really seeing him. Please, Alexander finally whispered, his voice cracking. Don't stop. Whatever you're doing, please don't stop. Isabella looked uncertain, her hands protective of the guitar. I was just talking to him. Sharing stories. My little brother went through something difficult too, not the same, but sometimes when the world feels too big and scary, we need someone to make it feel small again. Safe again. Alexander stepped fully into the room, his heart thundering as Christopher tracked his movement, the first time his son had acknowledged his presence in months. What exactly did you say to him? Alexander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabella's expression was earnest, her words careful but confident. I told him that being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means choosing to trust again, even when everything feels broken. I told him that his father, has been waiting for him to come back, whenever he feels ready. That love doesn't disappear just because we can't feel it for a while. At the word Pi, Christopher's entire body seemed to shift. His head turned more fully toward Alexander, and his left hand, the hand that had been clenched in a fist for 3 years, slowly opened. Alexander moved closer, hardly daring to breathe. Christopher's open hand was shaking, but it was reaching toward him. Reaching for connection. When their fingers touched, Alexander collapsed to his knees beside the wheelchair. 3 years of grief, guilt, and desperate hope poured out of him in broken sobs that echoed through the high-ceilinged room. Christopher's voice came out as barely a whisper, rusty from disuse, but it was the most beautiful sound Alexander had ever heard, Dad. Isabella continued playing softly, her music wrapping around the broken family like a healing balm. She didn't speak, didn't intrude on the moment, but her presence somehow made it safe for both father and son to be vulnerable. For 20 minutes, Alexander knelt beside Christopher's wheelchair, holding his son's hand while Isabella's guitar provided a soundtrack to their tentative reconnection. They didn't speak much, Christopher managed only a few more whispered words, but it was more communication than they'd shared since the accident. When Mrs. Hartwell returned from her errands, she found them still there, the brilliant pharmaceutical executive crying openly, his paralyzed son alert and engaged, and the young janitor's daughter who had somehow worked a miracle with nothing more than an old guitar and genuine compassion. That evening, as Charlotte's city lights twinkled beyond the bay windows, Alexander sat in his study holding a business card with smudged ink, Santos Cleaning Services, Isabella Santos, assistant. Below it, someone had handwritten a phone number in careful script. He thought about the millions he'd spent on specialists, the cutting-edge treatments, the state-of-the-art equipment gathering dust in the East Wing. Then he thought about a community college nursing student who had accomplished what money couldn't buy. She had given him back his son. But as Alexander replayed every moment of the afternoon, he realized something even more profound had occurred. For the first time since Victoria left, for the first time since Christopher's accident shattered their world into pieces, he felt something he'd forgotten how to experience. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope he'd clung to through failed treatments and disappointing consultations. This was different, quieter, stronger, like a candle flame that couldn't be extinguished by wind. Alexander reached for his phone, then hesitated. It was after 9 p.m., too late to call. But tomorrow, first thing in the morning, he would contact Isabella Santos. Not to hire Santos Cleaning Services. To ask if a miracle worker might consider helping his son learn to live again. Outside, November rain began pattering against the windows of the mansion that had been silent for 1,095 days. But inside, for the first time in 3 years, the walls seemed to hum with possibility. Christopher was asleep in his room, having eaten his first full dinner since the accident. Before being wheeled upstairs, he had whispered to Alexander, "Will Isabella come back tomorrow?" The question had stopped Alexander's heart. Because for 1,095 days, Christopher hadn't shown interest in tomorrow. He had existed only in a gray present, trapped between a past he couldn't return to and a future he couldn't imagine. But tonight, he was asking about tomorrow. Alexander looked at Isabella's business card one more time, then carefully placed it in his wallet. Tomorrow, he would make a phone call that would change everything. Tomorrow, he would ask a poor girl with an old guitar if she believed in the kind of miracles that money couldn't buy. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of the Thornfield mansion's breakfast room, casting rainbow patterns across the mahogany table. Alexander sat with his coffee growing cold, Isabella's business card between his fingers like a lifeline. It was 6:47 a.m. He'd been awake since 4, replaying yesterday's miracle over and over in his mind. Christopher had spoken. Christopher had moved intentionally. Christopher had asked about tomorrow. At exactly 7 a.m., Alexander dialed the number on the card. Santos Cleaning Services, this is Isabella. Her voice was professional but warm, even at the early hour. Miss Santos, this is Dr. Alexander Thornfield. We met yesterday at my home. A pause. Dr. Thornfield. Is Christopher okay? I've been thinking about him all night. The genuine concern in her voice struck Alexander like a physical blow. When had anyone outside his paid medical staff shown such care for his son? He's better than he's been in 3 years, thanks to you. Miss Santos, I have a proposition. I'd like to hire you, not as a cleaner, but as Christopher's companion. Name your price. Another pause, longer this time. Dr. Thornfield, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not qualified to be a medical companion. I'm just a nursing student who. You accomplished something in one afternoon that teams of specialists couldn't do in 3 years. Whatever your methods, they work. Christopher asked if you would come back today. It's the first time he's shown interest in anything since his accident. Isabella's voice softened. He really said that? He did. So I'm asking, will you help my son? I'll pay for your college, cover all your family's expenses, whatever it takes. The silence stretched so long Alexander wondered if the call had dropped. Dr. Thornfield, Isabella finally said, I can't take your money. But if Christopher wants me to visit, if you think it might help him, then yes. I'll come. After my classes today, around 4 o'clock? Alexander felt tears prick his eyes. In a world where everything was transactional, where his wealth usually determined the level of care his family received, here was someone offering help without conditions. Yes. Thank you. Miss Santos. Isabella, thank you. 3 weeks later. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Christopher now spent his mornings eagerly waiting for Isabella's arrival. She came every day after her nursing classes, bringing her guitar, her gentle conversation, and an unshakable belief that broken things could heal. Under her patient guidance, Christopher had progressed from whispered words to full sentences, from tentative guitar strums to playing complete songs. But the changes went deeper than anyone expected. Isabella had convinced Alexander to convert the mansion's solarium into a music therapy room, complete with adaptive instruments and recording equipment. Christopher spent hours there now, composing melodies that somehow captured both his pain and his growing hope. His physical therapy sessions, once torturous obligations, became collaborative efforts as Isabella worked alongside the medical team, translating their clinical approach into encouragement Christopher could accept. Most remarkably, Christopher had begun talking about the future again. He wanted to study music therapy, to help other people who felt as lost as he had. The boy who hadn't spoken for 3 years was now making plans for college, for a career, for a life worth living. Alexander watched these changes with a mixture of overwhelming gratitude and growing unease. Because somewhere in the process of watching Isabella heal his son, he had begun to fall in love with her. It happened gradually, in moments he tried to dismiss as simple appreciation. The way she laughed at Christopher's terrible jokes. How she remembered every detail of their conversations. The sight of her curled up in the library, studying for her nursing exams while Christopher practiced guitar nearby. Her tears of joy the first time Christopher wheeled himself across the room independently. Isabella treated Alexander with the same genuine warmth she showed Christopher, asking about his work, listening to his concerns about pharmaceutical ethics, even helping him see how his company's research could better serve low-income communities. She was brilliant, compassionate, and completely unimpressed by his wealth, qualities that made Alexander's attraction both deeper and more complicated. Because Isabella Santos was 20 years old, from a working-class family, and employed by him in a situation that made any romantic pursuit ethically questionable. Alexander was 44, powerful, and grieving. The potential for exploitation, even unintentional, kept him awake at night. But then Victoria returned. The confrontation. Victoria Ashworth Hamilton, she'd taken her new husband's name, arrived unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon in December, stepping out of a black Mercedes wearing Chanel and an expression of polite determination. Alexander was in a board meeting when Mrs. Hartwell informed him his ex-wife was waiting in the main parlor. He found Victoria exactly as he'd left her 8 months ago, perfectly composed, elegantly beautiful, and radiating the cool confidence of old Charleston money. She was examining a recent photograph of Christopher playing guitar, her manicured fingers tracing the glass. "He looks different," she said without turning around. "Alive." "Victoria. I wasn't expecting you." She faced him then, her blue eyes sharp with curiosity and something that might have been regret. "I came as soon as I got your message about Christopher's progress. I had to see for myself." Alexander had called her the week before, a brief conversation to share that Christopher was speaking again, engaging in therapy, showing signs of genuine recovery. He'd felt obligated to inform her, but he hadn't expected her to travel to Charlotte. "Where is he?" Victoria asked. "In the solarium with Isabella. They're working on a song for his therapy program." Victoria's eyebrows rose. "Isabella?" Before Alexander could respond, the sound of laughter echoed from the solarium, Christopher's bright, genuine laughter, accompanied by Isabella's musical voice and the gentle strumming of a guitar. "Let's go see," Victoria said, already moving toward the sound. In the solarium, they found Christopher and Isabella sitting in the afternoon sun, surrounded by sheet music and recording equipment. Christopher was playing a complex melody while Isabella sang in Portuguese, their voices blending in perfect harmony. The scene was so natural, so joyful, that Alexander felt his heart clench with both pride and longing. Christopher looked up as they entered, his face lighting up. "Dad!" "Isabella, this is my mom I told you about." Victoria stepped forward, her expression unreadable as she took in Isabella's worn jeans, her gentle demeanor, the way Christopher automatically turned to her for reassurance. "Mrs. Hamilton," Isabella said, standing respectfully. "Christopher talks about you often. He's very proud of your work with children's charities in Charleston." Victoria's smile was polite but cool. "And you are Christopher's therapist?" "Isabella is my friend," Christopher said quickly. "She's the one who helped me start talking again." "She's amazing, Mom." Victoria's gaze sharpened, taking in the obvious affection in her son's voice, the way Isabella's hand briefly touched Christopher's shoulder in reassurance, the comfortable intimacy of their working relationship. "I see," Victoria said. "Christopher, darling, would you mind if I spoke with your father privately? We have some family matters to discuss." Christopher looked between his parents, then at Isabella, uncertainty clouding his features for the first time in weeks. "It's okay," Isabella said gently. "I need to study for my pharmacology exam anyway. Keep practicing that bridge we worked on, it's beautiful." After Isabella left, Victoria wasted no time. "Alexander, what exactly is going on here?" "Christopher is healing. For the first time since the accident, he's..." "I can see that. What I want to know is why a 20-year-old girl from a cleaning service is living in our house, playing therapist with our traumatized son. She's not living here. She visits daily to help with Christopher's recovery. The progress has been remarkable. The progress is concerning." Victoria's voice carried the sharp edge he remembered from their worst arguments. "Alexander, do you hear yourself? You've put our vulnerable son in the care of an unqualified young woman with no credentials, no background check, no professional oversight. What do you actually know about her?" Alexander felt his defenses rising. "I know she's given Christopher his life back. I know she's studying to be a nurse, that she's supporting her entire family, that she's shown our son more genuine compassion than any of the specialists we've hired. Compassion doesn't qualify someone to treat severe psychological trauma. And frankly, Alexander, I'm concerned about your judgment. You're clearly infatuated with this girl. The accusation hit like a slap. That's completely inappropriate, Victoria. Is it? You're a grieving man who's been isolated for 3 years. A beautiful young woman shows attention to your son, gratitude for your generosity, and suddenly you think you've found salvation. It's textbook, Alexander. And it's dangerous. Before Alexander could respond, they heard Isabella's voice from the foyer, speaking rapidly in Spanish on her phone. Victoria tilted her head, listening. She's arguing with someone about money, Victoria said, her Spanish fluent from years of business in South America. Something about rent being late, needing more time. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. Isabella had never mentioned financial difficulties, had refused his offers of payment beyond her regular cleaning service wages. Victoria continued listening, her expression growing more troubled. She's telling someone that she's working on a solution, that her arrangement will pay off soon. Alexander, you need to consider the possibility that Christopher isn't the only one benefiting from this relationship. The words landed like physical blows. Alexander thought about Isabella's old guitar, her worn clothes, her family's small apartment. He thought about the tens of millions of dollars in his personal accounts, the trust fund that would pass to Christopher, the fortune that made him a target for those who might exploit his grief and desperation. But then he thought about Christopher's laughter, about the genuine tears in Isabella's eyes when his son had spoken for the first time, about the countless hours she'd spent patiently rebuilding his child's shattered spirit. You're wrong, Alexander said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Alexander, I'm going to ask you to do something very difficult. I want you to tell Isabella that her services are no longer needed. Tell her you're transitioning Christopher to professional care. Watch her reaction. If I'm wrong, she'll be concerned only for Christopher's well-being. If I'm right. Victoria left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear. That evening, after Isabella had gone home and Christopher was asleep, Alexander sat in his study with a glass of whiskey and a private investigator's report he'd commissioned weeks ago, standard procedure for anyone who spent time with Christopher, though he'd never bothered to read it. Isabella Elena Santos, age 20. Oldest of 4 children. Father deceased from construction accident when she was 16. Mother, Carmen Santos, worked multiple cleaning jobs to support the family. Isabella maintained a 3.8 GPA in nursing school while working part-time to help pay family expenses. No criminal record, no history of substance abuse, multiple commendations from professors for academic excellence and community service. The report painted a picture of a young woman carrying enormous responsibility with grace and determination. But it also revealed something Alexander hadn't known: the Santos family was 3 months behind on rent and facing eviction. Alexander set down the report, his hands shaking. Had Isabella seen him coming? Was Christopher's recovery just an elaborate manipulation designed to secure financial stability for her family? But even as the doubts crept in, he remembered Isabella's tears when Christopher first spoke, the way she studied medical journals to better understand his condition, how she'd never once asked for anything beyond the opportunity to help. The next morning brought his answer in the most heartbreaking way possible. The revelation. Alexander found Isabella in the kitchen at dawn, making breakfast for Christopher, something she'd begun doing without being asked, arriving early to ensure he started each day with proper nutrition and encouragement. Isabella, we need to talk. She looked up from the scrambled eggs, concern immediately clouding her features. Is Christopher okay? He seemed tired yesterday. Christopher is fine. It's about your arrangement here. I think it's time we transition him to professional therapeutic care. Isabella went very still, the spatula frozen in her hand. Have I done something wrong? Is he not improving quickly enough? No, it's not about your performance. It's about appropriate boundaries. Christopher needs certified medical professionals, not someone like me, Isabella finished quietly. Alexander watched her carefully, looking for signs of the calculated manipulation Victoria had suggested. Instead, he saw only genuine confusion and growing distress. "Dr. Thornfield, if you think it's best for Christopher, then of course I'll step back. But could we maybe transition gradually? He's still so fragile, and sudden changes." She was thinking only of Christopher's well-being, exactly as Victoria had said she would if she were innocent. But Alexander needed to be certain. "Isabella, I know about your family's financial situation. The rent, the eviction notice." Isabella's face went white. She set down the spatula with trembling hands. "How do you?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade. Isabella looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, and Alexander saw something he hadn't expected, not guilt or anger, but profound disappointment. "Dr. Thornfield," she said softly, 3 months ago, my family received an eviction notice. We had 30 days to come up with $3,000 or lose our apartment. Do you know what I did?" Alexander waited, his heart pounding. "I picked up extra shifts cleaning office buildings downtown. I sold my father's guitar, the one he brought from Brazil, the one that meant everything to me. I applied for emergency financial aid from school. I did everything I could think of except the one thing that would have solved our problems instantly." "Which was?" "Asking you for help." Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Because Christopher's recovery wasn't about money for me. It was about watching a broken boy become whole again. It was about using the pain from my own father's death to help someone else heal. And yes, it was about believing that maybe God put me in your house that day for a reason that had nothing to do with our rent." Alexander felt the world shift beneath his feet. "Isabella. We found the money, Dr. Thornfield. My brother Miguel got a scholarship to technical college that came with a housing stipend. My mother found a better job with a cleaning company that pays fair wages. We kept our apartment without taking a penny from your family, because what Christopher and I built together was too precious to contaminate with financial obligation." She stood up, gathering her composure with visible effort. "But I understand why you had to ask. Christopher is your son, and you have to protect him. I guess I hoped you knew me better than that by now." As Isabella moved toward the door, Alexander felt 3 years of grief, confusion, and desperate hope crystallize into perfect clarity. "Isabella, wait." She turned back, her eyes still glistening. "I'm sorry," Alexander said. "I'm sorry for doubting you, for investigating you, for letting fear cloud my judgment. You've given me back my son, and instead of trusting you, I listened to suspicion and prejudice. Dr. Thornfield." "Alexander. Please, just Alexander." Isabella nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. "Isabella, my ex-wife made me realize something yesterday. She's right that I'm infatuated with you. But she's wrong about why." Isabella went very still. "I'm not attracted to you because I'm a lonely man looking for salvation. I'm attracted to you because you're remarkable. You're brilliant, compassionate, and strong in ways that have nothing to do with money or status. You've shown my family what unconditional love looks like, and you've reminded me what it means to put someone else's needs before your own fears." Alexander stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But you're 20 years old, you're my employee in some capacity, and I'm a man with enough power to complicate your life in ways I never want to risk. So I'm not asking for anything. I'm just telling you that knowing you has changed me, just like it changed Christopher." Isabella looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said something that stopped his heart. "Alexander, what if I told you that watching you love Christopher, seeing how you've struggled to be the father he needed, has changed me too? What if I told you that somewhere between helping your son heal and watching you learn to hope again, I've fallen in love with both of you?" The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Christopher's wheelchair approaching from the hallway. "Isabella? Dad? Is everything okay?" I heard voices. Christopher appeared in the doorway, immediately sensing the tension between the adults who had become his world. Isabella and Alexander looked at each other, then at the boy whose recovery had brought them together, and both realized the same truth simultaneously. Whatever feelings had developed between them, Christopher's well-being came first. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Isabella said, moving to Christopher's side. "Your dad and I were just talking about your therapy program." Christopher looked between them suspiciously. "You both look like you've been crying." Alexander laughed, surprised by the sound. "Happy tears, son. Sometimes adults cry when things are going right, too." 6 months later. The Thornfield Mansion's gardens were in full bloom, azaleas and dogwoods creating a symphony of pink and white against the spring sky. In the gazebo Alexander had built specifically for the occasion, Christopher sat with his guitar, playing the wedding processional he'd composed himself. Isabella walked down the aisle between the rose bushes, radiant in a simple white dress that had belonged to her grandmother. At 21, she was graduating nursing school with highest honors and preparing to begin a graduate program in music therapy. At her side, her younger brother Miguel escorted her, beaming with pride in his new suit. Alexander waited at the altar they'd constructed beneath the ancient oak tree where Christopher used to climb before his accident. At 45, he felt younger than he had in years, his face bright with joy and anticipation. Victoria sat in the front row, having flown in from Charleston for the ceremony. Her initial objections had melted away during the engagement period as she watched Isabella's influence on their family continue to be nothing but positive. Christopher thrived under their care, having entered college early to study music therapy. The Santos family had become an extension of the Thornfields, bringing warmth and life to the mansion in ways money never could. As Isabella reached the altar, Christopher transitioned from the processional to a song he'd written for the occasion, a piece about broken things becoming beautiful, about love growing from the soil of loss. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Alexander was lost in Isabella's eyes, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. It had taken 6 months of careful courtship, of public dates and family dinners, of therapy sessions to ensure their relationship developed healthily outside the intense emotional pressure of Christopher's recovery. Isabella had insisted on financial independence, supporting herself through her final year of nursing school and refusing Alexander's help until after graduation. They'd moved slowly, deliberately, building a foundation based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than gratitude or rescue fantasies. "Do you, Alexander, take Isabella to be your wife, to love and cherish, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Alexander said, his voice strong and certain. "Do you, Isabella, take Alexander to be your husband, to love and cherish, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Isabella replied, tears streaming down her face. As they exchanged rings, Christopher began singing the chorus of his composition, his voice clear and strong. "From broken ground, new flowers grow from silent hearts, love learns to flow, what once was lost has found its way to this moment, this perfect day." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause. But Alexander and Isabella heard only Christopher's laughter, the sound that had started their love story on a November afternoon when a millionaire came home early and discovered that miracles sometimes arrive disguised as poor girls with old guitars. As they kissed beneath the oak tree, surrounded by the family they'd built from the wreckage of loss and the hope of healing, Alexander whispered against Isabella's lips, "Thank you for giving me back my son." Isabella smiled, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "Thank you for giving me a family." And in the distance, Christopher's guitar continued playing, the melody of broken things made beautiful, of love that grows strongest in the soil of shared pain, of the miracle that happens when two wounded souls choose to heal together. The mansion that had been silent for 1,095 days was now filled with music, laughter, and the sound of a family who had learned that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the whispered words of someone who refuses to give up on hope.